Greetings! Hello, it's VGA Fireside, and I'm your host and VGA Director of Exhibitions, Chaz Evans. How are you doing today? Super producer Bryce, can you hear me? Am I coming through? Is everything on the level? There's Bryce. Bryce is our beloved producer and Director of Operations for VGA, and in this format, appears in the form of a disembodied text box. Okay, so before we begin, how about some thank yous? First of all, thank you, Bryce, for being that text box at our side, making sure that everything's okay. We've got designer and director of communications, Eleanor Schichtel, for VGA. We've got the VGA staff and the VGA board. Thank you all very much. We've got a big thank you to the Chicago Center for Art and Technology. If there are Shy Cat students joining us this evening, hello and welcome. We are very glad to have you with us, and very special thanks to Paul for helping spread the word to the Shy Cat community. We also want to thank the Independent Game Designers Association Chicago chapter. If there are IGDA Chicago folks with us, hello. We're so glad you're with us. And also thanks to Ross and the IGDA crew for spreading the word. We also want to thank students in the Media Arts and Game Design module at the School of Communication at Northwestern University. Hello, MAGD module students. Great to see you. And thanks to Osuke and Lori for helping spread the word to MAGD module students. I need to thank musicians. The intro music that you just heard, that was very stylish and groovy, was by Electric Mirrors. And the fanfare, which you'll hear in a moment, is by the Oldham Music Center Youth Brass Band. Also, if you know of any organization or group that would be interested in this kind of program or have any feedback at all on what we're doing with the VGA Fireside show, please drop us a line at info@vgagallery.org. We would certainly love to hear from you. So without further ado, I've got all the thank yous thanked, and it looks like everything is as it should be here in the unfinished basement. So, super producer Bryce, can you please hit us with the opening fanfare? Yes! The fanfare is played, which means VGA Fireside has begun. And now it's time to introduce our very special guest this evening, Karina Popp. Karina Popp is an instructor at NYU who makes games about banality and bodies and labor. Her work has been selected at festivals such as IGF, Come Out and Play, Now Play This, and Fantastic Arcade. It is my esteemed pleasure and privilege to welcome to VGA Fireside, Karina Popp. Please help me welcome her.
Hi.
Hi, Karina. How's it going?
Good. I'm doing
Good.
good. I'm excited to be here.
Terrific. We're excited to have you, and we really appreciate you taking the time to do something that is just on the internet when we all have probably quite a few things to do in our homes. So let's get right into it, because we have plenty of questions that we might want to cover. Many Fireside viewers, I believe, are just interested in the stories of how people got involved in making video games in the first place. So my very first question would simply be, how did you get involved with making video games?
Yeah. The shortest answer is that I went to graduate school for game design. The longer answer is that I'm a lifelong player of games. I come from a family that plays a lot of games, and it's always been part of my life, but definitely not something I thought I could do myself. Definitely bought into that myth of like, you have to be good at math or something. And so, when it came time to like decide what I was going to do for college, for undergrad, you're 18 years old and you're like, I have to decide what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I chose English, which is the major for people who don't know what they want to do, I think.
Sure. And there's a few of those. You could do communications or something too.
Yeah. I went with English. I enjoyed like my English classes in high school, like writing papers, and I found that like some of my professors in undergrad would let me write papers about games instead of literature, right? Like the idea was really that like we were critically engaging with a work rather than like reading a novel necessarily. So I was able to like write papers about video games, and I was like, this is dope. I like this. So I wanted to pursue like scholarly work in games and game studies in graduate school. So I ended up at the NYU Game Center, which is actually like an MFA in game design, not necessarily really like a scholarly focused program, but I had it in my head that like I needed to know how to make games or like how they were made in order to fully understand them and write about them in an academic way. And through my time in the program, I just got to the point where I was like, oh, no, making games is fun. I kind of found it more fulfilling, and went more on the side of like creative practice rather than just writing papers and stuff.
Terrific. So taking a thoughtful approach, trying to interpret meaning out of games, and you first thought that we were going to take a writerly way about doing that. That's sort of like what focused you on working on in the field in the first place.
Yeah.
Do you still keep up with games writing in addition to games making?
Not so much in terms of my own practice, I guess. Like I do like teach game studies classes, and like I will read the work of others, but it's not something I've been doing recently. Mostly focusing on making stuff now.
And I want to follow up on another statement that is, I think, a popular myth that's worth touching on again. So you mentioned that maybe you don't have to be good at math in order to participate in the field of good video game making. Is this the case?
I am of the opinion, yes, that you don't need to be good at math. I'm definitely like one of those people that's like labels themselves as a person who's bad at math. I'm trying to break out of that. I'm trying to like improve my own knowledge. I like sat in on a math for game designers class. And I do think it's like helpful, definitely a helpful skill. But when it comes to like just getting into making games, absolutely, you don't really.
Yeah. I was trying to tee you up for a full proclamation. It's okay. You don't necessarily have to specialize in math to be a part of this field. You're already here, folks, right here at VGA Fireside. There's no math prerequisite. So can we talk about also what specific skills you thought were most useful when approaching creative work, when you're making games for the first time? For those who similarly are interested in getting into it, what kinds of tools, techniques, bits of software did you find to be most useful starting out?
I would say across the board, soft skills are the most useful. By soft skills, I mean like sort of your ability to plan out a project, your ability to communicate with other people, whether you're working with them or people that are like in the general like game community that you're in. The ability to do research and find, you know, if you're having trouble with something, whether that be a programming problem or like a game design problem, the ability to do research on like on Google or like playing other games and understanding the games and how you can apply it to your work. Those kind of like learning skills and communication skills will take you a long way with some of the other like hard skills of like programming and visual design and stuff, I think. Yeah, just the ability to learn, I guess.
Terrific. So that casts a pretty open door towards participation for those who may be watching or are interested in this kind of thing. So I guess we just talked about there was a early interest in writing, and it's fun to talk about influences on your work from a sort of transmedia perspective. So what kinds of non-game media do you also like to create in, or just find highly influential to your current work?
And just in terms of things I create in, I do a lot of things, not necessarily well, but I just like to try my hand at creating different things. Like I play piano kind of, and I do a lot of photography, which the practice of doing other work definitely informs what I'm doing. Like the game that I guess I'm most well known for, 10 Mississippi, is very much inspired by my time of like messing around with photography and with film, and explicitly inspired by the film La Jetée, of sort of drawing on different ideas there, not just like I don't know, I think when people hear that someone is inspired by film and games, they think like, oh, like the person wants to make like narratives and cutscenes and stuff, and that's totally valid, but I'm also really inspired by like the ideas that other people are employing in what they do, and how I can sort of morph that into a similar concept with games, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would you be able to share like an example of that? For instance, for those who are maybe not familiar, can you talk about sort of like what La Jetée looks like, or what ideas you were sort of gleaning from Chris Marker and remediating them into your own work?
Yeah. So La Jetée is this like short film. I actually haven't watched it in several years, but it's like it's sci-fi, right? It's like involves time travel and stuff, but it's told mostly, almost exclusively, a series of still images. There's like one part of it that has actual motion. I had to watch it for like a film class in undergrad, and as a part of the class, we had to do a similar method and make our own short film of photographs. And when I did that assignment, I totally bombed it. Like it was not good. But the idea of sort of in La Jetée of like really going against what a movie is, like it's in the name, right? Like it's like moving, and trying to like do the opposite essentially of like employing something that seems so antithetical to what a movie is, was really like stuck in my head. And so when I was in the context of like making games several years later, the idea of trying to make something that was like very much antithetical to the medium I was in was sort of what I was pulling from La Jetée. So like partially I wanted to reuse the idea of telling a story in photographs, but I also wanted to play with the idea of like what is really, really integral and key to video games. Yeah. And at the time I was like, oh, like interaction, like how can I make interaction like slower in a way that we don't totally expect from games, I guess.
Terrific. So you saw a kind of position taken against cinema from within cinema, right? In La Jetée, and saying, well, questioning what it's supposed to be, and saying, well, it doesn't necessarily have to move. We could do all kinds of things inside cinema, and you want to apply that perspective towards making a game like 10 Mississippi. Those sort of maybe too more length and a segue necessary to ask you to say, well, could we take a look at 10 Mississippi? Would you mind doing a live demo of this project for us?
Well, yes, Chaz, I would love to.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, let me pull it up here. cool. So, oh no.
Uh-oh.
Someone's at the door.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Do you need to handle it? We're all making media from our homes now. We understand.
No, it's being taken care of.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay.
It happens. This is the world we live in now. Not to worry. Take your time finding 10 Mississippi whenever you can.
Conveniently, I have it right here. I'll go ahead and play it.
Okay,
forewarning, I'm playing this in Chrome, and I realized the audio in Chrome is broken in 10 Mississippi, which is fine. I'm fine with that. But yeah, here, I'll pull it up. So the game starts out from this perspective of waking up. You can hear maybe that there is an alarm in the background, and there's like these like supposed to be sort of instructional hands at the bottom of the screen. They're supposed to tell you what buttons to press and kind of how to press them. So here I'm going to hold down the up arrow and the down arrow, which like opens my eyes. Oh no. Then I'm going to pull down my hand here on the rec player.
It's okay. It's just another viewer in the audience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. So the song is from Adult Mom. It's what's playing right now.
So when the user is playing along, I mean, they just need to, match the keys that they see represented on screen to the keys of their own keyboard.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So right now I'm going back and forth between the left arrow and the right arrow, opening up the fridge back and forth. Most of the scenes, where's my control? Most of my scenes here automatically move on after 10 seconds, hence the name 10 Mississippi. Some of them do complete after a set amount of time. So now we're in the subway and you don't really do anything.
Mm-hmm. So are any of the scenes that require you to solve something or perform a specific action, or is it's going to keep?
Absolutely not. It'll always keep going. It'll keep going forever because that's like life. Life just moves on. I guess that's the statement there.
Yeah. Okay, I'm getting a message. Please keep the demo going. I am getting a message from super producer Price that it's from someone in the audience who would like to know the answer to this question. Is Karina's mom a Hercules fan?
I guess so.
Yep, I guess so. Back to the demo.
Yeah. So now I'm like typing really any random keys, and the email on the screen is finishing. We're on the subway again. We're going home, and pretty much nothing really changes based on what you do or what you don't do. It was something early on in the design I was thinking about a lot, of like having meaningful choice, like this like really key game design idea. But I thought that was kind of adding like another dimension to it that I didn't really want to bring in. I wanted to focus on the idea of like the interaction and like turning and making a metaphor of the keyboard from this interaction as much as possible. Then I'm ironing a shirt, brushing some teeth.
Can we talk about that phrase itself, make a meaningful choice, and what you suppose that is conventionally, what that conventionally means to the game maker?
Yeah.
And how do we get past, how have you contrasted from that conventional idea of like a meaningful choice here?
Yeah, so a meaningful choice for game design typically is going to be like as from the perspective of the player, you want to be making choices that have like a clear and like discernible impact on the game. So when like, I don't know, like if you're playing like Mario, I don't know, like choosing to press the jump button is going to have ideally some kind of impact on the world, right? Like it's going to let me hit like a question block. It's going to let me jump into a Goomba, which changes the game space.
Right.
That's like the sort of like key pleasure of like a game. Or it's, you know, said to be the key pleasure of like of playing games. But I wanted to, in this context, I found it distracting, especially today. I think like in contemporary digital games, you're looking at situations where you find a game pleasurable because of the game feel, or because of many like of the sort of the aesthetic of the feeling of playing the game, not necessarily just like the decisions you're making. So I wanted to focus on that sort of like more of the game feel aspect of it. Right,
and flips the sort of responsibility of meaning making, you know, where the way you defined it, or is it sort of it's the assumption of what a meaningful choice is completely incumbent on the game maker to build that significance on their own, which includes the ability for, you know, the player to make meaning out of potentially any moment that they're participating, right?
Yeah.
So, what kind of meanings have you found players of your game, you know, have created when they're going scene by scene and matching the buttons that are represented on screen to the ones on their own keyboard?
I get a lot of different things, which is really, really fun for me. Let's see. I think like the most common is sort of the most obvious of like, oh, it's just like a boring day or of a person's life, especially given like the game repeats over time. Like nothing changes, and you just keep doing it until you choose to stop. So it very much feels like that resonates with some people. But I've also gotten some people that are talk a lot more about like the sort of like gender aspect of the game, which I always really love to hear, just because it wasn't something I was totally thinking about when I was making it, but I get where they're coming from, where they really look at like, especially like the morning scenes of like shaving my legs and like putting on mascara as like an extra form of work that I'm doing before I go to like my actual job. So that's a really cool one that I never expected.
Pre-work, pre-work work being documented and presented. Others recognize this in a sort of shared experience. So that's really interesting, this kind of inversion between sort of like, well, who is responsible for making meaning when you're creating a game? Is the designer? Could it be the player making their own meaning at the moment of play? And there's, I guess, another kind of inversion that I noticed when playing through 10 Mississippi, which is the subject of a video game is often thought to be about the player, or maybe a power fantasy, for instance, that's supposed to be offered to the player, you know, some sort of avatar that they control. And this is an autobiographical game, right? So while the impetus, the meaning making of play is on the part of the player, the subject matter is about the game maker as opposed to the player. So I guess I wanted to ask if you could talk about that, about choosing an autobiographical subject, you know, as the center of a game, and what that opens up for the creator of games. What does that allow?
It's an interesting question, and I'm going to push back a little bit. Mostly, so like it is an autobiographical game. It's been like 3 years since I released this, and like at the time I was like, this is not autobiographical, but it definitely is, and I was just kind of being stubborn about it. But the reason I wasn't thinking about it as autobiographical at the time is because I was worried that by doing that, I was like exposing myself in a way that made me really, really uncomfortable. And I think that was one of the biggest, like, very, very particular, I think, to autobiographical games. In retrospect, now acknowledging that this was an autobiographical game is kind of a huge constraint, I think, or for some people, it was for me, of like trying to distill something that you have experienced, even if it's just like mundane as like a daily routine, and deciding what you're comfortable showing, and then kind of accepting that it's just like not going to vibe with people. People are going to say weird things sometimes. People are going to like not understand parts. And kind of like working through that was like a very unique aspect of making an autobiographical game.
Terrific. So I read it as autobiographical. In a way, is it that you used yourself and photography of your immediate surroundings as the subject, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's an autobiography. Like, it could be a constructed narrative that just happens to be sort of using the elements of your everyday life.
Totally.
Yeah, this makes more sense. So we've gotten to see the game, and we've got to talk about it a little bit. We want to talk about the process there. I mean, there's so many sort of nuanced visual moments, especially the animation of hands, I think are pretty interesting. Would you mind talking about the process of how you actually make a moment like that happen, how it gets wrapped up into a web browser? For those who might want to make their own photography / browser-based projects.
Absolutely. It was often kind of a pain in the butt. It changed a lot over time depending on like where I was in the process. So a good chunk of this game was made at Stugan, which is like this accelerator program for games where you go to the Swedish wilderness for like 3 months in the summer with a bunch of other game devs, and everybody's like working on their games. So when I was there, I was working on like mostly like a placeholder basis. I was like taking really crappy photos that were like placeholders for what I would do later in a similar way you would do with placeholder art in like a platformer or something.
Yeah.
And trying to just test out the motion of the camera, if that makes sense, like how I would want the camera to move once I'm in the position to like actually start taking sort of the final photographs. And then sort of taking that batch of photos and then bringing it to my computer. In terms of like the technical process, that was like taking these pretty like large photos and putting them into sprite sheets, which is like a single image file that has a bunch of different frames of an animation. Because a web browser game, which is what 10 Mississippi is, needs to have like as few files as possible to load. People don't want to load like a ton of files on their browser because it'll take a long time. So that was a huge consideration of just like trying to keep the asset load as low as possible. And then going into like playtesting the game, I like made a quick way to use those sprite sheets in code so I could iterate on them and see what movement worked best with these interactions. So I could sit down and sort of set up a scene, say, maybe I want to use arrow keys that move up and down, back and forth with this motion, and then I'll test it. I'll have somebody take a look and I'll say, oh no, that didn't work. Maybe I'll try using like, I don't know, the number keys to do a different kind of motion and see if that's a little bit better. And yeah, it was just like a lot of going back and forth. And then finally, once I was in, like, I left the Swedish wilderness, I came back to New York, I could take some pictures. There was a lot of like, I would take a belt and attach the camera to my head. And I would do like rapid shoots, like 10 rapid consecutive photos of doing something. Or I would have a friend sometimes, I would use a tripod. It would sort of change depending on what was going on.
How much were you observed performing as this camera head being in public?
Uh, I probably pretty often. I tried to ignore it because it gave me so much anxiety. Like I did not want people to like look at me or notice me, and it's like such an absurd thing to do. So I tried to just like block it out. But probably quite a number of people.
Apparently, you did block it out enough to carry on and get the job done. I'd say that if you tried it again, I think you could, eventually get used to it and use it as a badge of pride.
Yeah.
So to recap that, then for those who are new to the idea of a sprite sheet, so it's several frames of an animation, all the different segments of motion placed onto a single sort of flat image, and then you're scripting moments in time that advance those individual images.
Right.
Make them and the miracle of motion is born.
Yeah.
Animation is there. Great. So we've been talking about 10 Mississippi for a while, but I know there's a body of work. There's other projects that lead us up to 10 Mississippi. Earlier we were talking about Space Kitty, and I guess I'm going to ask you about that. And are the projects that you have made before 10 Mississippi, like Space Kitty, did they inform, the way that you made that project 10 Mississippi? And well, I guess can you also talk to us about Space Kitty?
Yeah, absolutely. So Space Kitty did come a bit before 10 Mississippi. It was a project that I made for a class. We had to quickly learn a new programming language and like a new framework or engine or something. We got to choose what we wanted to do. And I, with my friend Alex Duncan, we chose open frameworks, which we knew nothing about. Both of us we had only been programming for about a year. And I think the only thing we really knew about open frameworks was that people made cool looking stuff with it. So we were like, we want to make cool looking stuff. Let's try it out. And so we made Space Kitty, which is I can't show you actual gameplay, which will be clear once everyone sees it.
Okay.
Because Space Kitty is a game that uses your webcam, and you aim your webcam, or you aim your camera, your flashlight on your phone or any other flashlight at the camera, and you shoot what we call doglians, which basically is like a really, really simple version of like what you would use like the old like PlayStation Eye thing, or something like that. I think we have like some footage from when we would show it at events like Come Out and Play, which is this cool festival where people usually bring things like big games, like games that are meant to take place outdoors, usually non-digital, require often like a lot of players. And this festival is like about these kind of like larger games. And we would show it there, and you take your camera, or I keep saying camera, your phone's flashlights, you aim it at the screen, and you're just shooting these little aliens that come by. And it is, if it sounds incredibly simple, it is. But that's kind of why I always really liked it, and I like to show it, because people they get really, really excited.
Yeah.
When I make the analogy to something like the PlayStation Eye, like it's with Space Kitty, I think the thing that really was cool is that like people were sort of thrilled by it being simple, it just being like a webcam and a flashlight, or like the flashlight on your phone. So I don't know, it was like very, very joyful to watch people play this game. And I would say that like the process of making it definitely eventually leads into 10 Mississippi and some of the other stuff I've made or worked on, in that like I'm always kind of like looking to sort of like in a very selfish way, as I make something, learn something new, or try something new. So for Space Kitty, that was like learning open frameworks, learning C++. And then for 10 Mississippi, that was like learning how to take photographs and try to make a game from it.
So yeah, you have this kind of policy and practice that like each project is an opportunity to get into a new tool, a new field, a new skill, as time goes on. I imagine the simplicity really is the draw here of Space Kitty. Just imagining like anyone can grab any light source and not have to have that hooked up to anything in the manner of a light gun that is a part of like video game peripherals for decades, right? You just jump in there and you start shining things, and you get the joy and pleasure of feedback, right? Just like, oh man, my light did something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you find people had on hand more than their cell phone flashlights in order to hop in and play? Like they're like, oh, I have this mag light that just for occasions like this. I was gonna definitely have a webcam based, alien Space Kitty shooting game.
I think that happened probably once. It was like someone with like big dad energy did have like one of those like little flashlights on them. Usually though, when we show it, we have like a little crate of flashlights in case somebody is like doesn't have a flashlight on their phone or they don't want to like waste their battery. So we have some for them too. Naturally.
Cool. So yeah, we see a relationship between the way you approach games, but still like very different subjects, very different ways of interacting. Would you say that spills over into the other games that you have made along the way leading to 10 Mississippi?
Yeah, I'd say leading to 10 Mississippi and after as well. I'm sorry. I think
that's okay. Can we know the name of this friend who's in
Maggie? And there are people screaming in the hallway, and she does not like that. Maggie, hey, shh, hey, come here.
Maggie, it's okay.
It's all right. It's okay. I don't know what they're doing either. They should be social distancing.
Yeah.
Okay. The joys of living in New York. Sorry. What was the last question?
I actually have a question from the audience that we didn't attend to while we were talking about 10 Mississippi, which is a specific question about one of the scenes where at the end where the main character is reading Faulkner. So yeah, can you tell us about why does it Faulkner made it in to this title?
No one has ever asked me, and I'm so excited and happy that someone has asked about it.
Why we didn't lose it then?
Faulkner was super intentional. So 10 Mississippi, like I said, the name comes from like the 10-second time intervals. But I'm from Mississippi. And Faulkner and several other parts of the game, there are small references to Mississippi. I went to the University of Mississippi where Faulkner famously went and like sat under the trees and like wrote and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to include sort of like a reference to, because like the game is clearly in New York, right? Like you're on the subway and stuff. Yeah. I wanted to have this reference to like another life, if that makes sense. And so this idea of like the repeated references to Mississippi being this other life, but also the kind of sort of intentionally using the book The Sound and the Fury in this way of like the sort of like the way you tell your own story and how that changes like the interpretation of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm so excited that someone asked that. Like made my night.
Thank you, Eleanor, for the question. So that is interesting because it brings up a kind of transdisciplinary approach where we've got sort of literature being remediated in games, and the choices that you make as a game maker. You're talking about how that is influenced by cinema. Now we also have connection to literature. This is maybe more a selfish question, or from the position of our organization, Video Game Art Gallery, where we present video games in an art historical context and sort of as a part of a larger contemporary art conversation. So we've connected to cinema, we've connected to literature. Can I ask, how do you position your work in relation to contemporary art?
Oh man.
Or do you at all?
So that's a really good question. Give me a second.
You can take your time.
I would guess like my knee-jerk reaction is that like I try not to personally do that. It's something I absolutely do with other people's work.
Yeah.
And when I talk about like other people's games.
Yeah, I mean other people's video game work specifically.
Yeah, but when it comes to me, like I guess I get worried about like narrativizing where what I'm doing right now places in. Like I don't know. I'm a little bit like afraid to do that. But if I sit and I think about it, I don't know. I think that my desire to make games with this sort of, I guess, like artistic frame of mind is coming from this merging of worlds of like being a person who grew up like steeped in pop culture and which games are a part of, but then also grew into like a larger world of like contemporary art, or even like not even necessarily totally exclusively contemporary art, of like not super being exposed to art beyond pop culture as a child, and then sort of getting older and being exposed to different forms of art and trying to merge them in a way and trying to be in conversation with these two different things that are important to me in different ways, I think.
So yeah, therefore the games are talking to studio artworks and vice versa. But that conversation is the important thing, as opposed to some sort of categorical framework or taxonomy saying you over there, you're a game, and you over there, you're an artwork.
Yeah, I get asked a lot, like, why do you even say that you make games? Like, why do you call the things you make games? Like, you could just say you make digital media art, and you could like go to lots of different festivals. Like, you would have like a more of a space in that area. And I get that. I guess like I learn from games more. I'm inspired by games more when it comes to this stuff. Like I'm educated as a game designer, and I sort of think of the things that I make as like abstractly kind of, I guess, game sort of. Yeah.
Yeah. And another answer to that question, if I could editorialize for a moment, is that like, why would you want to exclude yourself from the field, the term games, and therefore be in conversation with all those pieces and works as well, right? Just for the sake that the choices in a title aren't immediately recognizable as the most conventional way to make a game, but that, as we already discussed, is the point, right? You're recognizing what people expect of games and trying to create other proposals.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a couple more interesting questions for you, unless there's anything that about the specific works that you wanted to highlight for us before we move on. Anything else? You wanted?
No, I don't think there's anything I want to highlight. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was we were talking about it earlier that focusing on visual assets, photos, and animations from everyday life. This is one way that you have questioned or created alternative proposals about what goes into a game. Can we speculate on like what environment? This is sort of a vice versa of that. Like you've shown us what other things can go into a game that perhaps haven't as much in the past. But where can video games be other than the places we expect them to be, is where this question is going. What environment for video games, or maybe specifically your work in video games, where would you like to see them live or be displayed where they aren't normally seen?
That's another good question that I have to think about. I mean, there's certainly like galleries but it has been shown at some galleries, and I'm always excited when it is. I think I don't have a word for what I want in terms of like where I'd like to see my work displayed, because I'm always, and I guess you would have more knowledge of this than me. I always get the feeling sometimes when I show my games, even if it's in like a art gallery style place, that a lot of the attendees are still people that do game stuff, which I appreciate and I love, but I wish that I could like reach an audience or be in a space where there are people that like don't play games.
Yeah.
Like I desperately want that. Like the closest I've come is that like 10 Mississippi was shown at like a film festival, but it was shown like within like an interactive digital media portion of it. And so there were definitely like a much like greater like range of like histories with games in terms of the people that were playing it. Yeah, that's what I would want. I don't know what I would call that though, but that's what I want.
Well, I love how you reframe the question. It's not so much about a place or a space, but you're saying making sure that it gets to different communities that or groups of affinity that don't go out of their way to sort of self-identify as like, we're the games people. Want to get it out into the rest of the world. So you heard it here, people. If you this body, these games that Karina's made are especially for you, especially if you don't go around thinking about video games every moment of your life. Right? We want to get them to you as well. We want to get the games to those people as well.
Yes.
Here's another question that I got to ask TJ last month, and it's also important to me because the work we do with VGA is hubbed out of Chicago, but now more than ever is reaching out nationally and internationally. But still, the organization's basis in Chicago is important. I think is informed the way we do things, and so I'd like to ask other people living in other cities about physical location and like a local scene or community or ethic. How important is sort of where you are to the work that is made? Do you think being in a certain place, produces this kind of work, and in another place, another kind of work?
I think yes, and I don't think that's just true of games. Probably, it's true of pretty much anything that someone is creating. Like the place that you are in is going to impact what you're making. Like for example, like there's like, I don't know if it's super as true anymore, but for a long time, like indie games out of New York City were like local multiplayer games. Like that was the thing that people made. And I came to New York right at the tail end of that. And I really think it had an impact on me and the things that I made. Because I wasn't a huge local multiplayer or a couch co-op person, and then I kind of got more into it. I ended up making a game that was a local multiplayer game for No Quarter, which is like a exhibition. I don't know the proper word. I commissioned up here.
But also Space Kitty, would that be?
Yeah, that as well. I honestly, I literally just talked about Space Kitty. Totally forgot. Yes. So it absolutely impacted me. That's changing now. I think that the sort of kinds of games people are making here are kind of changing, and it's getting a lot more diverse in terms of what people are making. But I also I don't want to say it's too important just because as a person who comes from a small town, and definitely think that sort of geography had an impact on my mindset of what was and wasn't possible. If anybody is watching this and you're not in a big city, I still think you can make games and you can still find people around you. But yeah, being in New York and the game scene here has definitely had an impact on me.
Indeed. And if in fact, the space you're in and the other people in that place imprint the work, then being in a smaller town would be the most interesting place to make games, right? Because we have not maybe seen the games of that location yet. Anyway. Well, I'm glad to hear your take on that. I have another question, which has to do with, well, we saw your take on how to create new proposals, challenge some assumptions about what goes into a game in both sort of the visual assets, photography, animated photography, as well as sort of simple interactions with the flashlight or keystroke. However, when you're looking at the work of other people making games, what parts of the game making process leap out to you the most, or do you most engage with, you'd say? Would it be how someone creates an aesthetic with assets, visual or audible or otherwise? Or would it be some kind of behavioral loop? Perhaps now I'm giving too many potential examples. What do you look for when you're playing other people's games? Is the first question.
I guess like it changes, I guess, like on the genre or like the scale. Like I still play like lots of like AAA games. I'm a big like single player, like very narrative heavy game person, and in those kind of games, like I don't think I'm like directly inspired by them per se, but like what I'm looking for is like a story that makes me want to play until 3 a.m. and then like cry because it was so sad at the end or something. That's what I'm looking for in those more like narrative driven, like big bombastic games. But like I'll play action games as well. Like I was just fully like addicted to Hades for like 2 months. And even though like, again, it's pretty considerably different from my work, when I'm playing it, I'm really, really paying attention to the game feel and all of the juice, like all of the little tiny touches in the game that really, like, I think put it over the top, like all of the particle effects, the trail renderers, like the cute tiny animations, like the little stuff. And like I love, and I love to think about like, well, how did they do that? Like, how did they get this particular effect? Again, I don't know if I'll ever be in a situation where I'm making like an action-packed like roguelike like Hades, but I do think that there's a lot to learn if I am sitting down and I'm gonna make something that's kind of similar to 10 Mississippi in terms of thinking about the details and like thinking about the connection between visuals and audio and stuff. And then I don't know, I guess if I keep getting, I feel like I'm going like big and then getting smaller and smaller. If I'm saying like I don't know, like Twine games or something, I'm really looking for like something like a thesis almost. I think that's like weird to say. Like smaller scale games, I'm always looking for like the core idea of what's going on there.
Yeah, sometimes you can think of a game or any work of media really as constructing an argument, right? Like they have some sort of proposal to offer, and then they support it with whatever the experience is. Yeah. Like writing an essay.
Yeah, pretty much, yes.
And you find that in some of the more writerly games, it's like hypertext stuff, Twine games, etc.
Yeah, and like the thesis, I guess, when I say thesis, it's because I'm struggling to think of like a totally different word. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, there is a clear message here. But I really like when smaller scale games like know what they are, if that makes sense, and do that one thing really, really well, whether that's an idea that they're playing with or it's like an aesthetic that they're going for. So like Nina Freeman's How Do You Do It? Is popping to my head. Like it knows what it is. Like there's a joke there, but there's also like some truth there. Yeah. And I think that's why it resonates so strongly, because it's funny, but it's reflecting something real, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Something that was a specific sort of everyday experience that does elicit this shared memory in many others. And that therefore has maybe a lot to do with a game like 10 Mississippi. We have another question that's from the audience. And this one may be a bit of a puzzle and put you on the spot, but I would love to ask it anyway. So get ready. Someone asks here, are there any games from before this time of acceptance of like, hey, games can be art, which is the sort of luxurious point in history that we're standing from right now, where the connection's already made. But like, are there projects before our ability to have a conversation like this that deserve more recognition, in your opinion?
100%, absolutely. Like but you're right that like Now that I have been asked, I cannot think of it. But like people have been making, like even just considering digital games, like people have been making small scale digital games with sort of this idea of like artness or something in mind forever, since way before people have like been creating galleries or have been creating spaces to actually show them together and try to like allow these games as like, oh, they're art games, pay attention, it's important. In the 80s, people were making really cool artistic experimental things. And if I could think of something, I would tell you several of them, but I can't. Email me and I'll give you a big list, I promise.
Terrific. We can take our time with that one. History is, well, it's a big field. And, and yes, if super producer Bryce is mentioning something to me, if you wanted to follow up with your own selections of underappreciated projects from game history or interactive media history, we could feature that in an upcoming issue of VGA Zine. I'm sure we'd be happy to do that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. Speaking of history, you talked about research as like this pretty important thing, as a skill to have in your stable when you're starting. But I guess that's a pretty big word. As I said, this was speaking of history. History is one of the things that I like to research, but I guess I want to know, what does this term mean to you, and how does someone hear the word like, oh, wait, I need to research something in order to have an idea or a concept at the center of my game? How does one start breaking down the term research into something specific that connects with you?
That's a good question. I think that on one level, some folks may like immediately get this idea in their head that they've inherited from like high school. And I think that that's a way you can go. Like you can pull up Google, you can pull up, like if you wanted to get something that's like more academic style, like you need to do a research on somebody else's research of a game, you could use like Google Scholar or JSTOR or something. But I also really think that, especially for developers, either reaching out with people that are in your community and finding out like, hey, I have this idea for this game, and I haven't played anything like it before. Can you think of something that like might be similar or like have like something in common with what I'm describing? And they hopefully, fingers crossed, if you didn't come up with like the most unique idea of all time, somebody will have something that you can look at, and hopefully you can learn something from, even if it's not remotely exactly the same thing. I think that playing games and really paying attention to the way that you just think that they work is going to help you when you sit down to like actually make something. So just like playing to me is research.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, the way you described it, you know, you grounded it in as a conversation between those you and the people that are sort of in your immediate surroundings in your community. That's a very interesting way to frame research, because it dips us away from thinking about this is just about getting information for information's sake. It's first finding out what kind of information would actually be valuable to people I know and care about, right? Like, how does it answer a question that group is currently dealing with, and then therefore could be used in the lives of those people that you are around, whether that's your creative community, neighborhood, academic, like school, scholarly community, or whatever.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, Karina, believe it or not, this time has just flown by, and it is almost 6 o'clock, and I don't want to keep you, nor our viewers at home, who I'm sure have lots of other important, pressing things in their evening calendars. So it's about time to wrap things up. This is just an evergreen truth of all internet chat shows. Before we are finished, we simply must plug. We must plug things. So Karina, how can the fine people on the internet get to know your work better?
You can go to kpopp.io, kpopp.io, where a lot of my work that's online is posted, or my itch, which is Karina Popp. That's my username, and that's also my username on Twitter.
Terrific. And thank you, producer Bryce, for being so quick on the animated ticker graphic right there with the website.
Very nice.
It's so exciting. Moving graphics that are just generated live. I will briefly mention this program. VGA Fireside is produced by VGA Gallery, a non-for-profit art organization based in Chicago. Go to vgagallery.org to know more about us. And if you want to support this kind of program and the other things we do, like VGA Zine or VGA Reader, or potential physical exhibitions in the future, please consider buying some prints. We have a whole collection of artwork by video game artists that is available on the website, and that whole part of our organization goes to help both the artists who made the work as well as the gallery continue to do things like this. So please check out prints. And yes, Bryce has the Twitter and other kinds of information, internet identification stuff. That's all there. Anything else that I am forgetting to plug on the VJ side, super producer Bryce? Just give me a yes or no. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, in that case, we are about to wrap everything up for this, our second episode of VGA Fireside. First, I'm going to thank you at the beginning and the end of this. Thanks again to our guest, Karina Popp, for taking the time to speak with us today. Thank you. And again, I'm going to thank producer and director of operations, Bryce Pauls. I'm going to thank designer and director of communications, Eleanor Schichtel. I'm going to thank the VGA staff and the VGA board. I'm going to thank the Chicago Center for Art and Technology, the Independent Game Designers Association, Chicago chapter, the Media Arts and Game Design module at the School of Communication at Northwestern University. I'm going to thank Electric Mirrors for the intro music. I'm going to thank the Oldham Music Center Youth Brass Band for our illustrious fanfare. And again, if you think that anyone is remotely interested in this program or have any feedback whatsoever, please email us at info@vgagallery.org. We naturally would love to hear from you. Before we sign off, another rousing round of internet applause for Karina Popp. And here comes my sign-off line, which I'm still developing over time. Thank you for joining us. From all of us at VGA Fireside, please stay warm.